Hello, Bremalorians. The weather has finally started to tip towards fall, and I'm feeling the need to cozy up with pumpkin spiced lovelies and big fat books. Running a little behind schedule this year in production because, drumroll please, I'm getting married. So the rough plan right now is to release season 4 in mid-October, but in the midst of planning a wedding, if things get too overwhelming, I might bump production out to early November. If I do that, I will still do my best to get you a spooky episode in October, as I am a spooky girl, and I love my ghost stories, so if you've got any, send them my way. I'm going to answer some questions from the mailbag and maybe give you a couple more show updates here and there. All right, Jake asked a really great question over on Facebook that sent me down a history rabbit hole for a couple of days. He says, there are a bunch of old bicycles from like the 1950s in Peninsula Bike and Skate in Port Orchard that have license plates on them. What's up with that? Did Bremerton have a department of bicycles? Did they have to pay tabs? What was bicycle culture like back in the day? So yes, bicycle registration was a thing, and bicycle owners did have to pay for tabs. There wasn't a department of bicycles. The treasurer's office managed bicycle registration and fees. Bremerton started experimenting with bicycle registration in 1939. It cost $0.25 to register and 15 cents to renew. Once you were registered, the treasurer would issue a tiny bicycle license plate, about 4.5 inches square, that said Bremerton and your registration number. This made it illegal to operate an unregistered bicycle, and punishments were steep. $100 fine and up to a month in city jail. Yikes. This seems crazy to me, given that 80% of bikes sold at the time were kids' bikes. And there is a lot of planned recreation going on for kids who have a bike. In 1937, there was this spring break bicycle hike to Kitsap Lake, where 300 kids en masse rode their bicycles to Kitsap Lake with a police escort, of course. I can just sort of imagine this giant crowd of kids on bikes going up where 6th Street goes to hit Kitsap Way, that giant hill. There were bicycle parties and bicycle decorating contests. A bicycle parade was held on Warren Avenue down to Roosevelt Field. Kids were allowed to range further back then, and the newspaper used to print well wishes for kids embarking on long bicycle loop journeys around the Olympic Peninsula. There was even these short-lived bicycle trains that would take riders and their bicycles off to far-off places where there were interesting places to ride your bike. But it wasn't all kids. There's a real boom happening for bicycles in the mid to late 1930s. You know, America's just come out of the Depression, so families are still recovering financially. Maybe they can't afford a car yet, but they could afford a bike. A used car was $500, but you could get a bike for $30 to $50, which sounded really reasonable until I plugged this into an inflation calculator, because $30 in 1939 is almost $700. Women are no longer required to dress in the long skirts and corsets that had held them back from participating fully in that first bicycle boom at the turn of the century. More than 700,000 bikes were sold in America in 1935, and they were still on the rise. We start to see the bicycle policeman, mail and milk deliveries on bike, couriers on bikes, and of course the iconic newspaper delivery boy. I read one article that proclaimed in big letters that bicycles are now being used in the circus. The acrobats are using them on the loop-de-loop, never done before. But because of this boom in bicycle adoption, cities are dealing with more bike-related crime and accidents than ever. Stolen bicycles, abandoned bicycles, robbers on getaway bicycles, bicycle crashes. The newspaper's talking about Kitsap County's youthful theft gangs and the lawless ridership of the youth. They are also regularly printing pleas for thieves to return stolen bicycles to their newspaper delivery staff. It's likely that bicycle registration was put in place to try and offset some of the cost of dealing with all of this. It's also possible that we started registering bikes because of the impending war. When I was looking through old newspaper articles about bicycle registration, I was constantly seeing articles alongside talking about the war in Europe, what the Axis powers were up to, what Hitler was doing. America wasn't involved in the war yet, but we were aware of it. We were talking about it. It takes a lot of gas and rubber to fuel the war machine, and bicycles would become more important in the war years, when driving a car casually was seen as unpatriotic. It's possible that our bike registration was implemented early, just in case. Pearl Harbor is bombed in December of 1941, and bicycle rationing begins in January of 1942. Yep, bicycles were rationed. They're made of metal and rubber, after all. PSNS had its own transportation rationing board that was responsible for rationing bicycles to shipyard workers so that they could get to work. Bike registrations helped the city keep track of how many bikes we even had available. Anyone who sold a bike was required to report it back to the treasurer, and the bike needed to be re-registered within 5 days. The war does drive some innovation for bicycles, though, on the plus side. New, lighter Liberty bicycles are introduced, which require less metal to produce. Bike tires get thinner in the name of using less rubber, and this makes them more like a modern city or commuter bike. Bike rationing would continue throughout the war and finally end in December of 1945. And of course, after the war, the automobile rises to power like never before. The cars start to truly rule the roads. Bicycles continue to be popular with kids and delivery boys, but the adults move on to cars as their daily drivers. Bicycle registration continues to be required. Program declines over time. By 1976, it's publicly acknowledged that the program is now a failure. No one's registering their bikes anymore, and no one's being punished for it either. The ordinance is updated so that bike registration is free, and anyone can do it. There are also no more little tin license plates. Alright, my next question here is from Garrett Kelly, noted spooky boy and founder of Liminal Earth. He wants to know, who was Sid Peel? And he's attached a photo here of a gravestone. It's very simple. It's just flat rock, and it looks like the name and the dates are hand carved into it. It says Sid Peel, November 25th of 1909 to November 26th of 1938. Gosh, I guess that would make him in his 30s. He's young. And he's maybe died the day after his birthday? That's kind of sad. Well, let's see. Let's see if we can find out who Sid Peel is. Alright, here we are. The following is an article from the Bremerton Daily News Searchlight, printed Tuesday, November 29th of 1938. Headline: Body is found in gas-filled cottage here. Prosecutor says Sidney H. Peel died Saturday when a pot boiled over and extinguished flames on stove. Prosecuting attorney Ralph E. Purves today branded as accidental the death of Sidney H. Peel, 28-year-old Navy Yard relief worker, found dead late yesterday in a gas-filled cottage in the rear of 602 4th Street. Peel's body, fully clothed, was found across a bed in the cottage, and a gas jet on a small plate was wide opened. He had been dead since Saturday, Deputy Coroner William Steltz said. R.L. Hurd, a friend of Peel's, discovered the death when he went to the cottage yesterday. Police said they believe Peel, who was last seen Saturday, had placed a pan of food on the gas plate to boil and then went to sleep on the bed. The food boiled over and extinguished the flame, police believe, and Peel was overcome by the fumes. Purves said no inquest would be called. Peel had resided in Bremerton for the past 10 or 12 years, moving here from Seattle. He was a former bartender and a taxicab driver, and for a time operated his own taxicab company. He had been working in the Navy Yard as an ERN employee the past 2 months. Surviving him is his mother, Mrs. Isabel Blancher of Seattle, who was come here today for the private funeral services at the Steltz Chapel. Burial was in the Ivy Green Cemetery. And it's like, gosh, what do you say about that? It is sad. It's tragic. This is one of those historical things that we don't come across in modern times very much, but it used to be alarmingly common. Gas fumes. Because there were no electric stoves, right? So all stoves were gas stoves or wood stoves. And if you turn the gas on and the burner's not lit, if he was like that for 2 days, it's a small miracle that the whole cottage didn't blow sky high. If something had sparked, it would have. 602 4th Street. Which one is 602 4th Street? Oh, interesting. So, Google is telling me that 602 4th Street, it still exists. It's one of those little apartments downtown above the businesses. Possibly this one looks like it could be above Remedy Speakeasy, maybe? So I guess to sum it up, Sid Peel was a recently divorced man working part-time possibly at the shipyard who turned the gas stove on to reheat some food and fell asleep and never woke up again. Alright, let's handle some business, shall we? This is our first episode since changing podcast hosts this summer. I'm hopeful that the transition was seamless, and if you're hearing this, if you're all still here, it worked. I might be shouting into an empty void. I'm not sure. If you're still with me, leave me a comment somewhere. Send me a question. Shoot me a DM. Our new host is Substack. If you're a Substack aficionado, you know how this works. But for anyone who isn't, you can still find Bremalore on all of the same podcasting platforms and on YouTube. The website will be slowly transitioning over to Substack, particularly the blog. The other plus to Substack is that it's also a newsletter. I put tons of photos and clippings into my blog from my research, and I've always wished there was a hassle-free way to get these straight to you, the listeners. So if you want all of that Bremerton lore to hit your inbox, head over to Substack and sign up for the newsletter. All right, I think we got time for one last question. This episode's getting a little long, so. Rima asked, will the mural be saved at 6th and Park? Well, I poked into it a little. The short answer is Nobody's saying anything about it, and the building's now missing the roof. It's likely to come down any day now, so I don't think that mural is much longer for this world. Well, since I can't offer you any reassurances, I would instead like to offer you this eulogy for a dying building. "810 6th Street. Was born in 1947. A child of post-war prosperity. It was the home of Fremont Electric Company from 1958 to 1961. After that, the Piston Service of Bremerton from 1965 to 1984. It is safe to say that 810 6th Street was a car guy. It may or may not have spent some time in the late 80s as a sewing factory, and after that went on to become the new home for Cuvertino's, which was a reputable and long-standing purveyor of intimate apparel for ladies, to include prosthetics for women who had had mastectomies in the 90s. In 1994, Santa shopped at 810 6th Street in the Carey's Factory Direct Outlet. The mural went up sometime around the year 2000, and it appears to have been a joint project. The mural is created by Bremerton artist Dennis McDaniel and a committee at the request of Amy Burnett, who had just moved back to town. There's an article about the mural actually in West Sound Home, Garden, and Community magazine. I will link it for anybody who wants to go and see pictures of the mural in all of its glory, because it was originally 150 feet wide. It spanned the backs of 2 buildings. It started on the back of the 7-Eleven and then crossed the alley over to the building on 6th Street. Gosh, it's like this area has never changed my entire life. Here's what the article says about this. It says, some 15 years ago, I bought the house next to the 7-Eleven store. This is Amy Burnett talking. I grew up in this neighborhood with both grandparents living on that block, as well as the family plumbing business being where Monica's social club was located. It was rough. Drugs and prostitution ran rampant, and the first week that I had the place, a transient was beaten and killed on my front sidewalk. Since my heart was in that neighborhood, I decided to do something. We fixed up the house. We painted it a gray-pink color, and we called it the Rose Cottage. The back 7-Eleven concrete wall that spanned most of the property was like a blank canvas, so I paid Dennis to create a mural. The few of us formed a committee, began raising money, and tackled the next alley concrete wall. It was a massive endeavor. The committee did not get paid, but we did want working artists to be paid, as too often artists are expected to donate their time and their talents. It wasn't much, but it was something. In the fall of 2004, friend of the show, Discordia Games, moved into this building after leaving their 4th Street facility. They were located on the upper floor of the Carey building, as it was now called. This is also the same year that Kitsap County Resources and AmeriCorps start seeking volunteers. It's likely if Discordia was upstairs, maybe AmeriCorps was probably downstairs. In 2014, the building was purchased by the Kitsap Rescue Mission, and it spent the rest of its days providing much-needed services to the hungry and the homeless. 810 6th Street is preceded in death by the home of the Cashing family and will be survived by all who remember it. Thank you for your years of shelter, your years of kindness, your years of giving, your years of gaming. Rest in peace.
Do you have a question about Bremerton or its history? I want to hear it. You can find the show on social media at Bremelore or visit the website www.bremelore.wtf. That's right, you heard me. bremelore.whiskey-tango-foxtrot to leave me a voice message. I can't wait to hear from you.
I bet that mural would have a heck of a lot of things to say if it could talk. After having watched 30 years of the 7-Eleven parking lot,